Hi, ladies. Good morning. We're going to wait just one more moment because
Yes, this is
there's maybe a few more people trying to log on. We'll start. Good morning, everyone. Okay. So today's lesson is the last of this course, The Code to Joy. It's a 7-class course. My sister Hindi did the first 2 and then she gave birth. So I took over from class 3. So it's been really, really lovely learning with you all and deepening our appreciation of Judaism's perspective on joy, how to live a more joyful, happy, mindful life. And today's lesson, of course, is going to be the culmination of everything we've learned, as well as deepening everything that we've discussed. So this whole course has been focusing on Judaism's perspective on joy and how to be happy and how to increase our emotional well-being, all from a Torah perspective. And today's lesson is going to discuss how a bit of a deeper point, something that may be a little harder to attain, but it's definitely, a journey of 1,000 miles starts with one step. So even if it sounds a little bit lofty or hard to attain, let's keep in mind that, it's not an all or nothing, every little step counts and matters. So I'm going to share my screen as I usually do because I like to share the sources. And if anyone has any questions or thoughts that they like to share throughout the lesson, please feel free to unmute yourself or ask in the chat. Myra, can I get access to share my screen, please? Okay, let's start. And then once I'm able to share my screen, we'll do that. So there is a lot of controversy, or we can say differences of opinion when it comes to the idea of religion. I mean, we're all Jewish and we're all logging on to a Torah class, so we all probably have more of a positive perspective on religion, but we can still acknowledge that there are many people that, look down on religion or think that it's primitive or old-fashioned. And most people that think this way would definitely not consider any religion as a means to increase joy. However, this is not really the case because there have been studies done that actually prove that people that live religious lives are engaged in a relationship with God and are, engaged in a religious community, actually live more happy and wholesome lives. So I'm going to share my screen now that I have access, and let's read an excerpt from this study that was done on happiness. So it says, psychologists who have studied whether religious people are happy or unhappy, have often reached a general conclusion. The religious people are on the whole happier than the non-religious. In the vast majority of studies, religious people report higher well-being than their non-believing counterparts. Obviously, religion is a very general term. There are many different levels of religiosity. I think it's referring to people that associate with a religion and practice in whichever way they choose. Even when researchers define religiosity in various ways, such as attending church or having self-professed spiritual beliefs, studies show that religious people are on average mildly happier. In one study conducted by one of the authors, Ed, and the Gallup organization, about 1,000 people living in St. Louis were contacted through random digit telephone dialing and asked to answer a survey related to spiritual beliefs and satisfaction. It was found that respondents who believed in God and in an afterlife were more likely to be satisfied with their lives. Some scholars have accused us of pushing religion and of not being objective scientists. Our response is that whether people are religious or secular, they can learn something about how to practice happiness from the findings on religion and happiness. So I thought that this was appropriate because our whole course has been about the Jewish perspective and how Judaism can actually help us become happier and more wholesome people. So just to throw out a thought, why would we think this? Obviously, this quote didn't go into the details of how they found this to be true, but what would we think, if anyone wants to share their thoughts, why would religion contribute to a person's overall happiness and joy in life? Any thoughts? Or belief in God or belief in the afterlife?
Because hi,
Any
it's Jeannie. Because hi, I'm actually so many levels.
I think that everything that we've learned throughout this course
First
really
of all,
answers
it brings
the question, but
meaning,
essentially,
it brings meaning and purpose.
when we believe in God and we believe that we have a higher purpose, when we believe in the Torah and the ideas of loving kindness and please mute people. When we believe in the ideas of the Torah and loving kindness and that God loves us and takes care of us, we are filled with gratitude. And we discussed in one of the earlier lessons, that gratitude leads to joy. And just an overall sense of community and of purpose, I think definitely leads to joy. But if anyone has any other thoughts or ideas, I think that
Malka, do you hear
going
me?
in order of the lessons of this course, like I said, the first two were taught by my sister, but the first lesson we discussed gratitude. And like I said, gratitude is a huge point in Judaism. The very first thing that we do every morning is we say the Moda Ani, which is literally saying, thank you, God, for giving me this brand new day. It doesn't get more present than that. Imagine, you wake up every morning and instead of running for your coffee or just getting on with your day, you pause and you take a moment to reflect. Thank you, God, for giving me this brand new day. Thank you for allowing me to wake up this morning. And it centers you to have a more grateful and more productive day. And so then the second lesson, we discussed purpose, that every person has a purpose. And only when we are zoomed in and fulfilling our mission in this world can we truly feel grateful and also joyous, because we feel productive. We feel like we're working towards something. The third lesson, we discussed how each person has individual strengths, and those strengths that we have to be put to use. Because if a person, we gave a quote about baking bread, and we said, if a person has a specific talent in shining gems, and instead they bake bread, even though baking bread is important, we all need bread to live. This is a quote that we discussed in the third lesson. The person is still not fulfilling their purpose because they were given a specific talent that they are neglecting. And so we discussed how in order to truly feel joyful, we need to zoom in on what are my personal strengths and how can I put them to use? Because if we leave them dormant, it's very hard to attain real joy. In the fourth lesson, we discussed how trusting in God and believing in a God leads us to joy, because it minimizes worry and stress and anxiety, because we always know that God has our back and He's there for us, and there's no need to feel anxious. And in the fifth lesson, we discussed how we can be happy despite our flaws, that every person has certain character flaws, and we actually discussed why those flaws should never lead us to feel sad. And in fact, those flaws can actually be a catalyst to joy. That was lesson 5. And then last week, we discussed personal social relationships and how Judaism teaches us how to have healthy relationships. And only through having healthy social interactions and whether it's a friend, whether it's a spouse, having those those relationships in our life are really important for our overall happiness. And so all of these things were kind of mind to body, right? We discussed how, I think this was spoken about in the first lesson, but I didn't teach it. It was my sister, but the word for happiness in Hebrew is simcha. And the word for mind, like intellect or thought processes in Hebrew is machshava. And if anyone knows Hebrew, the Hebrew letters of the word simcha and machshava are actually the same exact letters, just scrambled around. So that shows that there is a deep connection between our mind and our sense of happiness, that our mind is really the source of our happiness. It's all about a mindset. Sometimes we think that happiness comes from external factors. If I lived this life, maybe I'd be happy. Or if I lost this weight, I would be happy. Or, if I was able to go on this vacation, I would be happy. And the Torah says, no, happiness comes from your machshava, from your mind. It's all a mindset. It's all where you put your mind. And that's going to be where your happiness comes from within you. But this lesson is going to be a little bit different. Instead of focusing on these, social, emotional modes to happiness, we're going to be discussing something a little more spiritual. What is the spiritual road to happiness? We know that, of course, Judaism, takes into account our social, emotional well-being. That's, the whole, like throughout this whole course, that's what we've been discussing. But today we're going to discuss something a little bit deeper. There's happiness that stems from more concrete things like we discussed previously, gratitude, relationships. These things are a little more concrete. Today we're going to be discussing something a little bit more abstract, a little more spiritual. And that's why I prefaced in the beginning by saying it may seem a little harder to attain, a little less, we'll make it practical. Don't worry. We'll definitely try to make it practical, but it is a little more abstract. And so the idea is that in order to reach that climax of being a joyful person, we must incorporate spirituality. We must incorporate a sense of godliness, a sense of religion. It's not enough to implement these things into our life without having the Torah element, without having the God spiritual element. I think a good example of this is that, as children, we get joy from things that are very different than we get joy from as adults. So a child gets a candy bar and they're filled with joy. They're so happy because they just got something so delicious. And the candy bar is something more concrete. So that makes a child happy. Art and philosophy and, good intellectual conversation doesn't excite a child because it's too abstract. Whereas an adult, we don't really get overjoyed from a candy bar, but, a deep personal connection, or for some people, art or music, those are the things that excite an adult because our intellectual capacity is larger than a child. And so we can get joy from things that are more abstract. And so too, all the other things that we've spoken about in this course are more concrete, and this class is going to be a little more abstract. And so it takes a little bit more of a sensitivity, a little bit more of an understanding, and maybe even a little more work to really get to that point of understanding that kind of happiness. But it's definitely within all of us. We all have a Jewish soul and we can all appreciate it to some level. So let me share my screen once more. We're going to read some Jewish texts on happiness, starting with Tehillim, Psalms. It says, Ivdu es Hashem b'simcha, bo lefanav birnana. Serve God with joy, approach him with joyful song. So we see from Psalms, from Tehillim, King David instructs us to serve God with joy. And it's actually spoken that, and this makes a lot of sense, it says in the Torah that serving God without joy actually it minimizes the mitzvot, meaning doing the mitzvot begrudgingly or with an unhappy attitude. It doesn't make God feel very good. So you're still doing the mitzvah, but it's not the same as when you do it with joy. When we infuse mitzvot with joy, it takes it to the next level. So really, serving God with joy, instead of it being its own mitzvah, its own category, it's like the couple for every mitzvah. Every mitzvah has to be hand in hand with joy. It has to go together with every single mitzvah. Doing it with a sense of joy. And this makes a lot of sense. Like, imagine in a relationship, you need your spouse to do certain things in the relationship. One moment, I'm just going to mute. Let me see if I know how to do this.
It's a tooth doctor.
Right.
Oh, here.
If everyone can mute yourself for now, that would be great. And then if you have any words to share, then please unmute yourself. I think Myra made me the host and I'm not sure how to do it. So sorry. So basically, joy is something that has to accompany every single mitzvah that we do. Let me share my screen again. Okay, so this is another quote. This one is from Maimonides. And the Rambam, Maimonides says, "It is crucial that we experience joy in performing a mitzvah and in loving God." So it's interesting to note that we were speaking before about the difference between a child and an adult. And, a child has a different understanding as an adult. And I think this is where a lot of the misconceptions about God come in. Because as children, because our minds are more simplistic, the way we are taught about God is in the analogy of a parent and a child, that God is like our parent. God is like our Father in heaven, and he provides for us everything we need, but we also have to do the right thing because, like a parent, God is watching and making sure that we do the right thing. But that's a little bit more of a childish understanding of God. And that, I think, is the source of a lot of these misconceptions, that God is like this scary person in heaven that is going to zap me if I do something wrong, or, these very negative ideas of God being, overpowering and reward and punishment. And if I do the right thing, I'm going to be rewarded. And if I do the wrong thing, I'm going to be punished. It's a very childish understanding of God. When we grow up, when we become adults, we have to graduate to the next level of understanding who God is. And that would be the relationship of a husband and a wife. And that is understanding that God is like a spouse, and he wants us to do the right thing because he loves us and because he wants to connect with us. And so this is why King David, we're going to read in this quote in Psalms, if we read his words, this is how he describes God. He says, "As a deer longs for streams of water, so I long for you, O God. I thirst for God, the living God. When can I come and appear in God's presence?" So we can see from King David's words that the way he describes God is in a very loving way, almost like a spouse, almost like a husband and a wife. Like, I'm longing for you. I desire you. I want you. I want to be close to you. It's not that like parent-child, teacher-student, I'm scared of God. If I do the wrong thing, God is going to punch me. If I do the right thing, God is going to reward me. It's so much more mature than that. It's a love. It's a longing. It's a desire. And so I think it's important when we understand, how to feel joy from a relationship with God, we first have to understand who God is and what our relationship should be about. It shouldn't be about reward and punishment. It shouldn't be about, God, I want to be, blessed, so I'm going to do the right thing. It should be from a love. It should be from, instead of out of fear, it should really be from love, that I love God and he loves me and I want to have this bond with him. And that's why we describe our relationship with God as a relationship, that it's something that is cultivated and it is something that is, it stems from love. And so too, what we're going to see is that mitzvot, a mitzvah is often described as, if I were to ask what a mitzvah is, definitely in a Hebrew school classroom, if I ask my students, what is a mitzvah? They would say a good deed or a commandment, which is not wrong. Of course, a mitzvah is a commandment from God, and a mitzvah is a good deed. But there is a deeper element of the mitzvot. And this we're going to read in the words of the Rebbe, of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. So he says, the word mitzvah is related to the Aramaic word tzavtza, which means connection. One who performs a mitzvah connects with God, the issuer of the commandment. This is the meaning of the Mishnaic phrase in Ethics of Our Fathers, Pirkei Avot, which we actually studied last summer. The reward of a mitzvah is the mitzvah. The reward of the mitzvah is the connection, the tzavtza, it generates with God, who issued the commandment. So basically, what this is saying is that the word mitzvah in Hebrew comes from the word tzavtza, which literally means in Hebrew, connection. And therefore, it's teaching us not to view mitzvahs as commandments, meaning God is like instructing me to do something. I'm obligated to do this because God told me to. Rather, we should view mitzvahs as a connection, that each mitzvah is a way for us to connect with God. And God gave us 613 mitzvot. And if we view mitzvahs as commandments, the number 613 is very overwhelming because that's a lot of commandments. But if we view mitzvahs as connections, points of connection, that's so beautiful that God gave us so many points of connection. He gave us 613 points of connection. And that way, not only do we have so many opportunities to connect with God, if I struggle in one area, I can always excel in another. You know, if it's hard for me to connect with God through prayer, I can always connect with God through giving charity or through, celebrating Shabbat. So every person has their mitzvah that they connect with, and that's their way of connecting with God. And the reason why God gave us commandments as connections, why would a commandment equal a connection? The answer really is that God is infinite and we are finite. God is omnipresent, God is unlimited, and we are humans, we are limited. And so the question becomes, how can a limited human being connect with an unlimited God? We're so vastly different. We're so incomparable. How could we ever have a connection? Usually a relationship or a connection stems from something in common, right? You have something in common with the other person, and that's what you choose to connect over. How can we connect with God when seemingly we have nothing in common? An example of this I once heard given is, imagine a simple young boy was walking through Princeton University and he happens to see Albert Einstein walking, and he's, oh my goodness, it's Albert Einstein, and he's so starstruck and he wants to go say hello, but he realizes he has nothing to say to Albert Einstein. He says, my intellect is nothing compared to Albert Einstein. I have no way to even start a conversation with him because nothing I say would ever interest him because our intellects are just so different, so far apart. And the answer would be, how can this young boy who really has nothing to say in the presence of the most genius man on earth have a connection with him? If Albert Einstein were to need a favor from this young boy, that would be the mode of connection. If Albert Einstein said to this boy, what do you happen to have the time? It could be something as simple as, what time is it? That is the point of connection. They have something in common now because he needs something from the young boy. Another example of this is if anyone has children. I know this with my little brother. You can ask a question of, how can a parent connect with their child, right? How can a parent truly connect with their child? Adults and children are so different. Their interests are so different. A child is fascinated, like we said, with a candy bar, and an adult appreciates art and music and philosophy. Those are things a child has no interest in. So how can they connect if their interests and their desires are so different? And I think a good answer is through when the parent needs something from the child, that is the mode of connection. So I remember like baking with my little brother as a boy, when he was a little boy. And when I would ask him like, oh, can you pour the sugar in the cup? That made him so excited because like I needed something from him. I needed him to help me. I needed him to mix the batter. And I remember like really seeing this example in real life, that like it was such a connecting moment because we needed each other. We were helping each other. And so too, God is so much greater than us. God is so infinite and we are so limited. Yet the way that we can connect with God is by doing something that God needs from us. God asked us to do something, and when we do it, we're fulfilling something that God needs us for. And that, I think, is like the greatest point of connection, because we're fulfilling a role that God needs us for, and that really connects us. And so that's why mitzvot connect us with God, because God needs us to fulfill them. And so they're like the basis of our relationship. Let me share my screen once more. So let's read text 7 together, because I think this will wrap up what we're trying to say here. This is also from Psalms, from Tehillim. It says, God's commandments are upright, causing the heart to rejoice. They are more desirable than gold, even the finest gold. They are sweeter than honey, the drippings from the comb. I too am careful about them, for in observing them, there is great reward. So what King David is saying here is he really appreciated, and I think we got this from the previous text as well from Tehillim, that God really appreciates and loves when we do his mitzvot. And he understood the greatness of the mitzvah. And that's really how we can appreciate the mitzvot. That's how we can derive joy from them, is when we appreciate the back story behind each mitzvah. When we understand the amazing connection and beauty behind every mitzvah, that's how we can connect with it and get joy from it. Similar to what we discussed in the first lesson about gratitude, right? We have so many blessings in our life physically. We have so many physical blessings, but often we overlook them and we take them for granted. And what we discussed in the first class that was given by my sister Hindi, she actually spoke about how to appreciate the blessings in our life and really understand the greatness of these blessings. But I think in this class, what we can say is the same thing applies spiritually. We have all of these mitzvot, we have all of these amazing commandments. And in order to not take them for granted, in order to appreciate them, we need to understand how beautiful they are, how important they really are, and how they connect us with God in a way that nothing else does. And when we come to that realization, we really appreciate the mitzvah and can derive joy from it, because we're so grateful and so joyous that we have this way of connecting with God. So number one is, I think, knowing that a mitzvah is a connection with God, knowing that mitzvahs are so beautiful and so important. And when we do them, it'll bring us joy, knowing that this is connecting us with God. Another aspect of a mitzvah that can bring to real joy is knowing that a mitzvah is our purpose in this world, as well as the purpose of the world as a whole. So when God created the world, we know that God, if anyone has been on previous classes, it's a whole nother topic. It's spoken about in Kabbalah, but we've discussed it in depth actually in previous classes. The concept of how God hid himself in this world. God created the world, and instead of revealing himself, right? We know that God is something that we have to discover. It's something spiritual that we need to, cultivate a relationship with God. But it's not something that we see with our physical eyes. And the reason for that is that God wanted us to discover him within this physical world. He didn't want a spiritual world. He didn't want spiritual beings. And that's why we spoke about this previously, that's why God created us with imperfections, because he didn't want us to be perfect. He didn't want the world to be perfect. He wanted to make an imperfect world where godliness is concealed. And he tasked us with the job of revealing God in this world and making the world a better place. And so when we realize that mitzvahs are the way that we make this world a better place, our mission in this world, fulfilling our mission, also we discussed this in a previous lesson, fulfilling our mission does bring us joy, because when a person feels stifled, like they can't fulfill their purpose, that causes depression and sadness because you feel inhibited, you feel trapped. But real joy comes from being able to fully express your potential and fully express your mission in this world. And mitzvahs are our guideline. The Torah is like our guidebook, our blueprint for how to make this world a more godly place and make this world a home for God. So how can we really appreciate the mitzvahs when we do them? When we do a mitzvah, how can we appreciate the meaning and the depth behind it? And the answer is that the Torah gave us a way to do that. The sages, the rabbis actually implemented, the sages actually implemented blessings before mitzvahs. So I know that it may be like, it seems like it goes together, but if we think about it, almost every mitzvah in the Torah is preceded by a blessing. So for example, before we light Shabbat candles, we first make a blessing. Before we light Hanukkah candles, we first make a blessing. Before we eat challah on Shabbat, we make a blessing. So I think it's actually every mitzvah besides for charity. Before every mitzvah that we do, there's a special blessing that we say first. Why is this? So the rabbis wanted us to come to an appreciation of the mitzvah, that before we do the mitzvah, we should first pause and say a blessing that really, if we think about the meaning of the blessing, and we don't just say it by rote, but we actually think of the meaning, which we'll go through now, these blessings actually instill in us an appreciation of the mitzvah. And I'll explain why. The words of a blessing go like this: Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam asher kiddishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu. And then the end of the blessing, you fill in whichever mitzvah you're doing. So if you're lighting Shabbat candles, you say lahadlik ner shel Shabbat. Or if you are, if a man is putting on tefillin, they say lahaniach tefillin, that I'm going to put on tefillin. Whatever the mitzvah is, you fill in the end of the blessing with the mitzvah you're about to do. So what are these words that we say before every mitzvah? We say Baruch atah Hashem. Blessed are you, God, Elokeinu melech haolam, the God of the world. Now let's understand what these words mean. Baruch means bless, but it also could mean to draw down. Bricha is like to draw something down. So Baruch atah Hashem, really, if we look deeper, it means I'm drawing down God. Each mitzvah, like we spoke about, is a way of bringing God into this world and connecting with him. So when we say Baruch atah Hashem, we're saying I'm drawing godliness into this world. Elokeinu melech haolam. And by doing that, by doing a mitzvah, we're bringing godliness into this world and making God the creator, the king of the world, because melech haolam means the king of the world. But actually deeper, we're saying not only blessed is God, the king of the world, but when I do a mitzvah, I am drawing down God, making him the king of the world. Does that make sense? I'm bringing godliness into this world and recognizing that God is the king of the world. The next few words are also really beautiful. It says, Asher kiddishanu b'mitzvotav, that God sanctified us with his mitzvot. Now, the word kiddishanu actually has another meaning. It could mean betrothed, like when a groom betroths the bride, like an engagement. But it's actually a stage in the Jewish wedding. It's called kiddushin. When the groom puts the ring on the bride, it's called kiddushin, which is the same word as kiddishanu. It means to betroth someone, to say we are now a unit. We now belong to one another. And so when we say Asher Kedishanu b'mitzvotav, what we're saying in English means God betrothed us with his mitzvot. Through the mitzvot, God betrothed us to be his spouse, to be his beloved. And then the end of the blessing, obviously, like we said, fills in the mitzvah, the particular mitzvah that you're about to do. So really, the blessings that we make before a mitzvah are supposed to center us, are supposed to help us be mindful of what we're about to do. Instead of just lighting the candles and moving on, we're supposed to pause and recognize the importance and the magnitude of what we're doing, that we are blessing, bringing God into this world. And through this mitzvah, God is betrothing us to him. He is connecting with us and creating a relationship with us. And as Jews with a godly soul, there's no greater joy than to be connected with our source, to be connected with our God, as well as mitzvahs that connect us with one another. And so that's the beauty of a blessing. It really helps us pause, just like we spoke about previously, that we need to stop and appreciate the physical blessings that we have in our life, right? Health and our family and safety and our well-being. We have to thank God for our physical blessings. From this lesson, we see we also have to thank God for our spiritual blessings, for the ability to connect with God, with a spiritual being. And like we spoke about the first source that we discussed, we see that connecting with a God, connecting with our heritage really does bring joy. And this was proven in a study that people that were connected with their religion felt more happy, more joyful. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to pipe up, unmute yourself. So, yes.
Malka?
Yeah, it's a little bit scratchy. Okay, your voice is getting like
Yeah, I don't know. I was trying to
now-
unmute myself before, and I was speaking, and when you asked a question, but it was unmute. But yeah, I'm not sure why.
I know. I don't know. I didn't hear anything. Now I hear you great.
Oh, you do? It's
Yeah.
a great. I love what you're saying. It's just so meaningful, and really, I'm just reflecting as you're speaking on just the power of it. I just really, it's wonderful just to listen to you, Malka, and not because you're my daughter, but just the way you teach, and the class is just wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. So now that we understand how mitzvahs connect us with God and can bring a person to joy, what about the moments in our life when we're not performing a mitzvah, right? Because not every single moment of our life is engaging in a mitzvah, but we know that the Torah commands us to be joyful at every moment. And so how can we be joyful in the moments when we are not fulfilling a mitzvah? So this was also, I think, spoken about in one of the previous lessons. The Tanya describes why it's so important to be happy at every moment, why it's not okay to feel sad, why sadness is a bad thing. And the Tanya describes two people that are wrestling. If two people are wrestling back and forth, even if one of them is physically stronger than the other, the person that is joyful and that is energized is going to win. So if somebody is in a conflict and they are lethargic and melancholy and unhappy, even if they're physically stronger, this is the example that Tanya gives, even if they're physically stronger, they're not going to win over their opponent because they don't have the drive to do it. And so what the Alter Rebbe says in the Tanya is that joy is so important in Judaism. Happiness is important because when a person is joyful, they're able to overcome negative instincts and negative, their Yetzer Hara, their evil inclination. It's easier to overcome the negativity within us if we are joyful. Because when a person is sad or depressed, they're way more susceptible to giving into negativity because they don't care, they are apathetic, and they're just unhappy. But when a person is joyful, exactly, willpower. When a person has joy, they have willpower, they have drive, they have energy, and that energy allows them to overcome any negativity, whether it's from outside or within. Joy is like the source of all success because it allows you to it gives you the drive to overcome hardships. Whereas if a person doesn't have joy, they'll fall prey to every challenge that comes their way. So that is why the Torah tells us to be joyful at every moment, because joy is not just a standalone thing, right? We spoke about this before, that each mitzvah could be standalone, but joy can't. Joy has to accompany every single thing that we do. It has to be part of everything that we do because it's the drive, it's the willpower to overcome all the challenges of life. And so if a person has to feel joyful at every moment, how can we feel that joy even if we're not doing a mitzvah actively? And so from this spiritual perspective, we know that a person can even if a person isn't actively engaging in a mitzvah, a person can live with God in every single moment of their day. And we also discussed this in one of our lessons, that everything that we do, even if it seems neutral, like it's not a mitzvah and it's also not something wrong, like having a coffee, brushing our teeth, going to work, all of these mundane day-to-day things that we do can be infused with godliness, with holiness, when we just change the perspective, right? We said joy and thought, mind are the same words in Hebrew, same letters. They have the same Hebrew letters because they go hand in hand. By changing our mindset around these things that we do, these mundane, everyday things, everyday tasks, we can infuse joy and meaning into them. For example, if a person is eating breakfast, they can just, eat their breakfast and move on, or they can pause, they can thank God for the food, and they can say, or think to themselves, I'm eating this food to have energy to have an amazing, joyful day. And so that's just an example of how every mundane or seemingly mundane thing in our life can be infused with meaning and can be infused with holiness. And when we do that, when we live a life where even the mundane, physical, monotonous parts of our day are infused with meaning, that really brings us to joy because we feel the wholesomeness of our life. We don't feel like our life is fragmented. Like, this is when I express my kindness. This is when I do what I have to do. This is when I brush my teeth. This is when I get dressed. This is when I play my role as a mother, or this is when I go to work. And that fragmentation can make us feel very all over the place. But when everything we do has one center, has one goal, which is to connect with God, bring holiness into this world, and connect with each other, that really brings to a wholesomeness and a joy that we get from even doing a mitzvah, right? We can get that joy from doing a mitzvah, but we can also get that same joy from doing a mundane action, but infusing it with holiness and with meaning. Eating happens to just be a good example because food gives us energy. And it's just about like zooming into, what am I going to use this energy for? Am I eating just to satisfy my desire, or am I eating to have energy to, be kind to another person, or to be the best parent that I could be, or, to show up for my friends, to show up for my family? It's really just a mindset shift. like we spoke about in the beginning. So from this, we see that spiritual joy is really crucial to our overall joy. It's not enough to say, I'm going to focus on gratitude and I'm going to focus on my relationships. Spiritual joy is at the center of everything, because when we have this relationship with God, when we feel like we can infuse every moment of our life with godliness, with holiness, we can truly feel happy in any circumstance, because happiness comes from within, like we said, and connecting with God is something that we can do in every single moment, even in the smallest of ways. And so when we focus, number one, on the beauty of every single mitzvah, every mitzvah has beautiful depth and meaning. And like we said, it connects us with God. That is truly how we can feel holy and feel joyous, because I can connect, me, a lowly, limited person, has the ability to connect with God. That really brings me the utmost joy, because I realize how much potential that I have. And also, like we said, the mitzvot and the Torah allows us to reach our potential. And it's not enough to feel joy from concrete physical things. We also have to have this element of spiritual joy, because each person, or not just each person, every single thing in this world has its potential. The potential of an inanimate object and the potential of a human being are very vastly different. And the Rebbe actually speaks about this, that each part of creation, so we have 4 parts of creation: inanimate objects, vegetation, animals, and humans. So each level of creation has its potential that it's supposed to reach. So for an inanimate object, for example, a rock, or, let's just say a rock, an inanimate object, has a very limited potential. All it really has to do is sit there and pretty much do nothing can't do anything. It's inanimate, but an inanimate object has very limited potential. It can't do much. It just kind of sits there, and it's fine, because that's all it was created to do. Vegetation has to grow. If a plant doesn't have all the things it needs to grow, water and sunlight, it's stifled. It can't fulfill its potential. It's not meant to stay as a seed. It's supposed to grow into a beautiful plant. And so if the seed just stays a seed its whole life, like the rock just stays a rock its whole life, never changes, that seed is not fulfilling its potential, because it has the potential to grow into a beautiful flower, but yet at the same time rooted in the ground. An animal, on the other hand, has a higher, more expansive potential than a plant, because an animal, if it were trapped in the same spot like a plant, it would feel also stifled and trapped. An animal has to be able to roam freely. An animal has to be able to have companionship, have food and shelter, and all the things that an animal needs in order to fulfill its animal potential. But just like the animal, if it were fulfilling the potential of a plant, it would not be fulfilling its potential at all. Or if a plant were doing the same thing as an inanimate object, also it would feel stifled. So too, if a human being is living within the confines of an animal, which is just to fulfill its physical desires, physical pleasures, safety, health, and food and shelter and companionship, that's not enough for a human being, because we have a godly soul. We have this element of spirituality that we need to cultivate. Otherwise, we feel stifled. A human being, that's why you have people that have everything in their life. They have family, they have a job, they have, physical comforts of life, yet they still are seeking or searching for more, because they need that spiritual element of life. They need that something higher, something deeper, something a little bit more than just the physical pleasures of life. And so a human being needs that higher level of depth, that higher level of spirituality and understanding of the world and of God, because That's who we are. We're created with a soul, and our soul seeks and yearns for more. And so having joy or happiness that just comes from physical things is too shallow for us human beings, basically. It's not enough. We need to have a joy that comes from something deeper, a joy that comes from something spiritual, which comes from a relationship with God and also deep, meaningful connections with other people. And so that, I think, is really why this type of joy is so important. And that's why we're ending off with it, because all the other forms and modes of joy are important and they are definitely essential. But this is like the key to it all, because if we don't have this type of joy that comes from fulfilling our purpose, connecting with God, and making this world a better place, feeling like we have a higher purpose, not just fulfilling my needs, but actually fulfilling the needs of God, the needs of other people, that brings us the deepest joy. So Torah learning, mitzvot, connecting with God allows us to fulfill our purpose in a way that is deeper and spiritual versus joy that comes from having all of our physical needs being met. So with this, we will conclude that joy is something that is not or cannot be stagnant, right? Joy has to be alive. It has to be growing with each day and with each moment. And so if a person says, I'm content, I'm complacent, I feel like I'm not a sad person, I'm a pretty happy person, these lessons still apply to you, because joy is something that has to be ever changing and ever growing. And we live in a world that unfortunately has a lot of hardships, a lot of sadness. There's a lot of things to become depressed about. If we really wanted to, we could focus on all the negativity in the world, and it would be very easy to put ourselves in a sad, depressing place. And that's why joy is something we always have to continuously work on. It's not like a level that you reach, like, oh, I'm joyful, I'm good to go, I don't need to work on it anymore. Unfortunately, I think especially because of the world we live in, which has so much negativity in it, it's very easy to be dragged down. And so therefore, joy has to be constantly worked on. Constantly, we have to be aware. Am I joyful? Am I happy? Am I exuding confidence and joy and happiness to other people around me? Or God forbid, the opposite. So it's not something like that you reach and you're good to go, check the box. It's actually something that has to be constantly cultivated and constantly worked on, because there's infinite levels of joy. And just to conclude, they say fake it till you make it. And, there's different opinions if fake it till you make it actually works. But when it comes to joy, it actually does seem to work. So if a person finds themselves in a very sad, depressing place, one of the first steps is to act in a joyous way. And hopefully that acting with joy will trickle down into their emotions and thoughts. There was actually a very interesting study that was done where they basically brought in 3 groups of people and they showed them a funny cartoon. And so the first group of people, they had them just simply watch the cartoon. The second group of people, they had them hold a pen in their mouth with their lips. And I mean, I actually tried it, but I wanted to see if it was actually true. But if you were to put a pen in your, like across your mouth like this and hold it with your lips without allowing it to touch your teeth, you would notice that the position your lips take is in a frown. It actually causes your lips to like frown, basically. Sorry. And they had this group of people watch the cartoon while holding the pen in their lips, which caused them to frown. And the third group of people, they had them hold the pen in their teeth, with their teeth and not with their lips. And if you try it, it's a fun experiment. If you put a pen across and hold it with your teeth, it'll actually cause you to smile. It'll cause your, like, these muscles to go up. So what they found is that the people that were holding the pen in their teeth, which caused them to smile, found the cartoon to be utterly hilarious. The people that were holding it in their lips with their smile muscles in a frown, they found the cartoon to not be very funny. And the people that didn't have anything, they found it to be like whatever, not so funny, but maybe a little bit. So we see that the people that their mouth was forced into the position of a smile found it to be the most funny. And the people that were forced to frown found it to be the least funny. And so I think what this experiment shows is if somebody is really struggling with joy, I think the first step is to smile, because the physical things that we do literally with our face, the physical action of smiling actually can trigger joy within us. Obviously, it takes a lot of internal work also. I just wanted to end off with, we spoke so much about the internal work that could be done to bring joy. I wanted to end off with a simple, quick tip of smiling, of exuding happiness just through your face, through your expressions. And hopefully maybe that will bring to more internal happiness, or at least lead someone on the journey of finding internal happiness. So with this, we will conclude. It's been an honor and a pleasure. We are continuing the women's classes, but we finished this specific course of the Code to Joy. If anyone has any questions or any thoughts that they'd like to share, please do before we log off for today. If anyone has any thoughts.
I just want to say it was a fabulous session. The entire course was great and so relevant to what we're all living today. That's all.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you so much. I appreciate it, ladies. I really appreciate everyone who comes on to learn together. It really is amazing, and it really is inspiring that us as Jewish women can connect from all over the world, or all over Florida. I don't know where everyone is in their homes, but we can connect over Zoom, over technology. We can use technology for a positive thing. This is the best example of using everyday things, something like as simple as technology, to connect with one another. Sorry. So thank you all. I appreciate it, and have a wonderful day.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you.
And have a wonderful day. Bye, ladies.